And this
it's a beautiful day.
It is a beautiful day. And this is Writer's Voices. I'm your host, Monica Hadley, and with me is my co-host and mother, Caroline Kilborn.
And good afternoon, everyone. This is a most interesting book.
Who do we have today, Mom?
We have Ellen Hopkins. And Ellen has written, oh golly, she is a #1 New York Times best-selling author of Crank, Glass, Fallout, Burned, Smoke, Impulse, Perfect, Tricks, Traffic, Identical, Tilt, and Rumble, as well as the adult novels Triangles, Collateral, and Love Lies Beneath.
And we had Ellen on Writer's Voices a couple of years ago with Traffic. Now, one of the things that makes, which most of those books were for young adults, and one of the things that makes Ellen's books unusual is they're written in verse for the most part.
Which really makes them easy to read.
It does.
For me, it did, yeah.
And what else does it say about Ellen there?
Okay, it says now that she lives with her family in Carson City, Nevada, where she has founded Ventana Sierra, a nonprofit youth housing and resource initiative. Visit her at ellenhopkins.com and on Facebook, and follow her on Twitter at Ellen Hopkins, LIT.
Welcome back to Writer's Voices, Ellen.
Thanks for having me. It is currently snowing here in Carson City. So.
Oh,
I know. I saw that on the Weather Channel. Man, you guys are really getting it.
Okay. We would feel sorry for you, but we're too busy enjoying the sunshine. We really had a very gray winter up until a couple weeks ago, and then the sun came out, and it's making up for lost time.
But not much snow. But you know, I lived in Northern California, and we depended on that snowpack for water all summer, so I know what that snowpack is very vital. So that's good.
Have you had a rough winter there?
It's been wet for sure. On both sides of the Sierra. So I'm right across the Sierra from Northern California, and they're getting pounded with rain again.
Wow.
SLA is getting pounded too. So, and it's it's like this is not exactly the best way to make up for 5 years of drought, but
but you take what you can get, right?
Right.
For sure.
Yeah,
for sure. Now, Ellen, you've the book that we're talking about today is The You I've Never Known, and I understand this is in some ways the most personal book that you've written. Would you expand on that a little?
The book is about a girl whose father has moved her around the country for 14 years, and they finally settle into a little Northern California town, actually, and she's been at one school for an entire year, and she has friends, and she has love interests, and she's just really starting to figure out who she is, at least she thinks so, and then she discovers that her life is based on a big bed of lies. And the story was inspired by a personal chapter of my life, which was 3 weeks after I divorced my ex-husband. He kidnapped our 3-year-old daughter out of daycare, and I lost her for 3 years.
Oh, my goodness.
3, but that was the inspiration for the...
Wow.
So you could write from personal experience, exactly how the mother felt, and that was you could tell. You could tell.
It's like I liken it to how you have these parts of your life that you stop thinking about because they hurt too much, so you kind of close them up in little closets inside your brain. And for writers, at least for me, I know every now and again I have to open those closets and let some of those stories out.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it takes a long time. This has been a couple decades, so 3 decades, so. I held it for a while, and then it was like, okay, it's time to write this book now.
I expect that experience had a lifelong impact on your daughter, too.
Of course, because the age 3 to 6 are such formative years, and that connection, when we finally reconnected, it took a while to remember. I mean, we remembered it, but it took a while to really rebuild the trust and I don't know, I guess the real connection, between mother and daughter.
Of
I never gave up on finding her, just like the mother in this book doesn't, but there were times when I felt like giving up, you know.
Oh, wow.
So to reconnect was a startling experience for both of us,
Wow.
actually.
The daughter in this book is named Ariel, and she has no idea that that's what happened. And
No, her father's been telling her that her mother deserted her in favor of her girlfriend, which is not true, of course. But that's what she's always believed. So she's always believed that her mother wanted nothing to do with her.
wow.
So when she reconnects, it's dramatic.
Wow. Now, with your own experience, was your daughter even old enough to be aware of what had happened at all at the
Not
time?
really.
No.
Although it was interesting because, and how I got her back was finally he settled back into his hometown area, and his grandmother called, and she was like, it's just not right what he's doing. So she helped me get her back with school schedules. And I had custody, formal custody, and court orders were lost back there several times because the sheriff happened to be a school chum of his. So it was frustrating and frightening because we actually were threatened with our lives if we ever went back to pick her up. And but when I stopped outside of her first grade cubby, and I had lost a bunch of weight, and my hair was a different color and whatever, but she recognized me right away. She turned and it was like, Mom. So the part was there, for sure.
Wow. So what was it like for you writing this and bringing up these memories? Was this the hardest thing you've ever written?
Probably, yeah, because reliving that loss was very difficult. So it was cathartic. It was also a way of releasing a lot of anger that I've held in for a long time.
I bet.
At him. And, so I live in Nevada, he lives in Indiana, and my daughter lives like right around the corner from me. We're pretty close right now. I'm raising grandchildren, she's raising kids who are the same age, so we do a lot of extended family stuff. But every now and again he shows up, and that's really hard. It's really hard.
Yeah.
Well, I will say that I have aged better than he has.
Well, as they say, living well is the best revenge, right?
Yeah, that's
But
true.
no, it was, and a lot of it back then we didn't have cell phones, there were pay phones, and so I would collect phone calls ostensibly from Kelly, but they were from him, and they would be taunting me, and they would be from New York, Hawaii, Virginia, Florida, so he was bouncing around the country with her, so I wouldn't be able to track them down.
Wow. Did your daughter, did you discuss that you were going to write this with her beforehand?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
And she knew it was something that I had thought about writing for a while because I had discussed it with her over the years. And I actually thought about doing it as a memoir, but this way I think allows the distance. When you fictionalize, you can change what you don't want to get too close to the real people or whatever. And I think that was a good thing too. Although this girl reminds me a lot of my daughter.
One thing that that you said about this book is that it's an example of how adult-child dynamics have changed in young adult literature.
That's true.
How is that?
Because when I first came here, the parents were always the antagonists. That was, and I guess for a lot of kids growing, you think of your parents sometimes as the antagonist in your life because they're telling you can't do what you want or whatever. But and almost, first of all, there wasn't a lot of YA lit when I got here. Was not as much contemporary stuff. It was more fantasy and paranormal and stuff like that. So the growth of contemporary kind of has happened during the time I've been writing, which is good. But I would notice that for sure, that the adults were always supposed to be the bad guys, or that if they even showed up in the books at all, they were kind of like window dressing. But a lot of kids really are close to their parents or want to be closer to their parents or whatever. So I thought it was a good place to create that dynamic in this book. if I could, and I think I did.
Right, because, Ariel, because of the life that she's lived with her father, he's been the only continuous figure in her life. And
that's right. And, and he wanted it that way. He wanted the control. He wanted her to be so reliant on him that she would never question their lifestyle or any of the things he did. So, he's the definition of the word gaslighting, which, that word is now coming into play a lot more.
Yes.
But he definitely, and in real life, that was true, too.
Ellen, I read some passages from this book to a friend who has been experiencing that in her own life, and it really, like, wow, somebody really understands.
Well, I lived
about
it too.
The gaslighting.
It's because he was a classic abuser as well. I mean, physically and emotionally abusive, which is why the relationship didn't last. But so I experienced it, and I really understand from being there what it's like to be convinced that you're the one in the wrong, that you're the one that's at fault, that that you're seeing things incorrectly or you're interpreting things incorrectly. So that was a real experience of mine, and it opened my eyes to what that meant for sure.
Well, for anyone who doesn't understand what the term gaslighting means, how would you describe it?
Well, it comes from there was a stage play and then a movie about a husband who kept, and they had gas lights in their house, and he kept turning them down, but then he convinced his wife that wasn't happening. So it's when you are being emotionally coerced to the place where you start to question yourself. You start to question the things that you're seeing or thinking or feeling about this other person, because they're just telling you that you're wrong all the time, or that this is your fault. This wouldn't have happened if you wouldn't have done that, or whatever. So
right.
There are different ways it can happen, but that's what it is. It's when you start questioning yourself and your own values, or maybe even your own sanity, which is what happened in the movie and the play.
And certainly your own perceptions.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You're listening to Writers' Voices with Monica and Caroline, and our guest today is Ellen Hopkins, author of The You I've Ever Known. And Ellen's a #1 New York Times bestselling author many times.
Yeah, really.
Ellen, how did you, I think we went over this in our previous interview, but for many of our listeners who be new, how did you get started writing young adult literature in verse?
Okay. Well, it's been a long journey. So I've been writing poetry like forever, because I'm ancient, so that makes it just about forever. But I've been writing poetry since I was a kid, and publishing poetry through high school and college, and growing it as a member of a poetry group here in Carson City for many, many years. And then my way into writing fiction was through journalism. So I was a freelance journalist for many years, and then from there I moved into children's nonfiction, and I've published 20 nonfiction books for young readers, so history, science, biographies, things like that. And then it was a personal story that brought me to YA literature as well. So my first novel, Crank, was inspired by my middle child's meth addiction. So, this is something we have now been struggling with, this addiction with her for 21 years. So about 6 years in, she went to prison, and I needed to figure out why. I needed to figure out why she made the choices that she made and what part I might have played in them or whatever. So I started the book in prose to try to figure that out. And I wanted to write first person from her point of view rather than, a memoir or something, because I wanted to understand. And then in writing the book, first of all, the prose wasn't working. It was my voice and not her voice. So I put the book away, and I did a poetry workshop with another verse novelist, Sonia Sones. Her first book had just come out, Stop Pretending, which was about her sister's struggle with schizophrenia. And in verse it worked well, so I thought I'd try it, since I've been writing poetry anyway, and it really, really worked, because it allows you so deeply inside the characters. So it worked for the story. I knew I had to write it as a young adult because I wanted to turn other teens away from making the same choices that my daughter did, if I could. And that's how I got to writing YA. And then within corresponding with other young people and families of addicts and whatever, I really came to understand the litany, the extent of some of the issues that these kids face every day. And so I've stayed here, and I write about those things because those kids want to see themselves in books. They want to know they're not alone. They want to know people care enough to write about those things. And so here I am.
And it does seem like you gravitate towards very kind of dark topics. And is it really just because that's where you see the need?
Mostly, yeah, because there are a few of us, especially when I first arrived here. Again, there was not a lot of contemporary being done, and somebody needed to expose these things. It's as parents, as adults, we want to believe that our teens are, that they're just nice, innocent kids, and nothing bad's ever going to happen to their lives, and that's not the case, and it's not even always something that they go looking for. Sometimes these things come to them, and so I think, again, exposing it, shining a light on issues like, abuse or sexual abuse or teen prostitution. I've written about domestic minor sex trafficking. These things are happening every day in every school in this country, and so the knowledge, the understanding, the insight into why and how maybe we can help our kids beyond them or out the other end, or to let them know that they can come out okay on the other end. I think it's really important.
Yes, Traffic was the book that we discussed the last time you were on Writers' Voices, and did you see Ashton Kutcher's testimony about trafficking?
I did. He's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And we see again now there's been a spotlight shined on it. The FBI has a task force that's all they do now. That wasn't the case when I first wrote Tricks, which is the book that came before that. That was not the case.
Wow.
So this is something that by exposing it as a problem, we're able to take a really hard look at it and try to figure out how to avoid it or stop it.
Wow. So your books may have had an influence on that.
I think maybe. Yeah, I do. Because again, this is not. It's a hard thing to talk about young people being trafficked into the sex trade, but the average age of those kids is 12 years old.
Oh gosh.
And I mean that's young, and so to understand that, to be able to recognize a possible victim, and we've had stories in the news of like a flight attendant who noticed a girl on an airplane, and she figured that's what was going on, and that was what was going on, and they were able to rescue that child. Or, maybe a hotel room clerk would say, that doesn't look right to me, or whatever. But that's, again, it's knowledge. It's knowing that it happens and what it looks like. And then
right.
there are places you can call in anonymously now and whatever to be able to help pull those kids out of that situation.
And you're right. Just having more people aware of it can make a huge difference.
Yeah, and it is, for sure.
Yeah. I understand that there's an organization that trains flight attendants on what to look for and how to handle it when they see it, which, is don't try and interfere directly, but get the authorities involved.
Right.
Yeah.
Because those people are dangerous, that's for sure.
Yeah. Wow.
Well, if you get down to the grassroots, too, we have, the town where I live, we have a very large truck stop, and so we're trying to mobilize people to, be aware that this is going on, and if you see something, because there are restaurants there, too, that townspeople go to, do something, say something.
Yeah, and aren't you actually just sort of going and hanging, some people are going and hanging out there?
They are.
Just to keep an eye?
Yep, that's what they're doing.
Wow.
I know.
Trying to make a difference in your
right.
own backyard.
Yeah.
Well, Ellen, when you started publishing your fiction, your verse, you had a term for it. What is it? Fiction poetry? Or was there another?
Verse novel?
Verse novel, that's what it was. Did it take a while for it to catch on, or was it immediately successful?
Actually, it really. First of all, I was grateful that I found an editor like right off the bat who was interested in the forum, and with Crank especially, it allowed. I spent a lot of time with word placement on the page to evoke feelings. So, like, there are poems there where the words come down the page like snow because her thoughts are so scattered while she's using, and then the thoughts kind of coalesce and come back together into more standard stanzas when she's not. So, there's an art to that, which was, I can't draw, but I can create paintings with my words, which was, it's fun and challenging, and I really enjoyed doing it. It did not take that long. I mean, it's taken longer for people who read in a really linear fashion, so kind of better readers actually have a harder time with the forum than reluctant readers who are pulled into the visual interest, which is interesting. But I would hope that people that do read well would give the forum a chance. 'Cause, a lot of adult readers, especially, they see a book that looks like poetry and they're like, "Oh, nope, not touching that."
Yeah, I know. But I think I read pretty well.
Yeah.
But I really liked it because I could read it fast.
Right.
And
it reads like fiction. It's just
it does.
what the form. What it does is because there are fewer words on the page, and the title of the next poem basically is the line from the page before. So you're pulled through it pretty quickly because you don't really want to stop. It doesn't have chapter stops or anything like that.
Now, what I liked about this book, and I wonder if you did it in your other books as well, is you do have some prose in here. For instance, the mother's story is in prose. And is that how you did the other books as well, or?
No, although Rumble, which is the one before Traffic, that one did have prose passages because there were essays that the boy wrote that were important to the story, so those were in prose.
Okay.
So I also feel like a lot of reluctant readers and non-readers, their teachers give them Crank to start with because it really, they're so spare, the language is so spare, and they can get through it quickly because the story is compelling. And then they want more, so then as you go through my books, they become denser, the text becomes denser. So I feel like I'm also encouraging those kids who don't want to read better. And that feels really great when a kid comes up and tells me, "I've never finished a book before, but I read the whole book in 2 days or whatever."
Oh, I'll bet.
And they become more confident in their reading skills, and that's really gratifying to me to be able to help them do that too.
You bet. Because if you can read, you can accomplish a great deal in life. And you just think, because if you can't read, and there are a lot of adults who can't in this country, I know. And I taught some of them, tried to teach some of them. It just hinders you in so many ways.
It does. We're raising grandchildren again because my daughter had a bad relapse about 3.5 years ago. So we've got young children in the house again, and boy, these kids read. I'll tell you that. It's their big escape. It's like the thing that they just really do. They're just drawn to books, and I'm so happy for that.
You bet.
Well, Ellen, why don't you read a passage from Ariel's perspective in The You I've Never Known?
All right. I think I'm just going to read from the beginning because the beginning really sets the stage for the book, and it also creates the theme, which for me is home. To begin. Oh, to be given the gifts of the chameleon, not only the ability to match the vital facade to circumstance at will, but also the capacity to see in two directions simultaneously, left, right, forward, backward. How much gentler our time on this planet, and how much more certain of our place in the world we would be, drawing comfort like water from the wells of our homes. Home. 4 letters, 1 silent, a single syllable pregnant with meaning. Home is more than a leak-free roof and insulated walls that keep you warm when the winter wind screams and cool when summer stomps all over you. Home is a clearing in the forest, a safe place to run when the trees shutter all light and the crunch of leaves in deepening darkness drills fear into your heart. Home is someone or two who accepts you for the person you believe you are, and if that happens to change, embraces the person you ultimately find yourself to be. I can't remember every place Dad and I have called home. When I was real little, the two of us sometimes lived in our car. Those memories are in motion, always moving. I don't think I minded it so much then, though mixed in with happy recollections are snippets of intense fear. I didn't dare ask why one stretch of sky wasn't good enough to settle under. My dad likes to say he came into this world infected with wanderlust. He claims I'm lucky that at one day till I turned 17, I've seen way more places than most folks see in an entire lifetime. I'm sure he's right on the most basic level, and while I can't dig up snapshots of North Dakota, West Virginia, or Nebraska, how could I ever forget watching Old Faithful spouting way up into the bold, amethyst Yellowstone sky, or the granddaddy alligator ambling along beside our car on a stretch of Everglade roadway. I've inhaled the heavenly sweet plumeria perfume, dodging pedicab traffic in the craziness of Waikiki. I've picnicked in the shadows of redwoods older than the rumored Son of God, nudged up against the edge of the Grand Canyon as a pair of eagles played tag in the warm air currents, seen Atlantic whales spy hop, bodies surfed in the Pacific, and picked spring-inspired Death Valley wildflowers. I've listened to Niagara Falls percussion, the haunting song of courting loons, so I guess my dad is right. I'm luckier than a lot of people. Yeah, on paper, all that sounds pretty awesome, but here's the deal. I trade every bit of it to touch down somewhere Dad didn't insist we leave as soon as we arrived. I truly don't think I'm greedy. All I want is a real home with a backyard and a bedroom I can fix up any way I choose, the chance to make a friend or two and invite them to spend the night. Not so much to ask, is it? Well, I guess you'd have to query Dad. I know he only wants what's best for me, but somehow he's never cared about my soul-deep longing for roots. Home is where the two of us are, was a favorite saying, and the sky is the best roof there is, except when it's leaking. Rain reference cracked me up when I was real young, but after a time or 20, stranded in our car while it poured because we had nowhere else dry to stay, my sense of humor failed me. Then he'd teach me a new card game or let me win at the ones I already knew. He could be nice like that. But as I aged beyond the adorable little girl stage, the desire for place growing, he grew tired of my whining. That's what he called it. Quit your whining, he'd say. You remind me of your mother. Why don't you run off and leave me too? Who'd look out for you then, Miss Nothing's ever good enough? No one, that's who. Not one person on this planet cares about you. No one but Daddy, who loves you more than anything in the whole wide world and will lay down his life for you. You remember that, hear me? I heard those words too often, in any number of combinations. Almost always it came flow, alcohol, and tobacco.
That's Ellen Hopkins reading from The You I've Never Known.
And that it refers to Ariel, because when she discovers that she was kidnapped as a child, and she has to go back and try to relive these things and find out who she is.
Right. And there's another meaning to The You I've Never Known, I think. Even before that, she's trying to figure out who she is. This really is a book of coming of age, of finding your own identity.
It definitely is. And, that's exactly what the teen years are, right? Is trying to figure out who you are. Yeah. And that's hard enough when you know who your parents are and when you know where your place, at least in your childhood place in the world is, while you're looking to figure out where you're going to go in the future and what you want to do and who you are as far as your sexual identity, which she struggles with as well. Those things are things that every kid goes through, but especially when you find out something like this, it shakes all that.
Absolutely. Now, I'm curious how you came to the decision, because you talked about how she's struggling with her sexual identity, and that's actually a pretty major part of the story as well. What made you decide to incorporate that into this story?
Because it's such an important, every kid's doing that anyway. And then when you've been coached and told that your mother left you because she's a lesbian, any kind of feelings you might have as a girl toward other girls are going to confuse you even that much more. Mm-hmm. Especially if you're being tugged toward boys too. So she's bisexual, or she's trying to figure out exactly what that means to her, because she's attracted to both a girl and a boy. And when you're already kind of watery about who you are, to have both those being tugged two ways there just makes that much more difficult, I think. It's creating characters that resonate with more people than just like the one that this one is based on. I want to create stories and characters that resonate with all kinds of readers, including kids who are struggling with their sexual identity.
Another thing I find interesting is she's very she really likes horses. Is very comfortable with horses.
Well, I grew up with horses.
So that's a little
Kelly,
bit of you.
When she was little, she had a pony until she disappeared, and then so that's also been something that's interested her. And I guess, I don't know, there are horses in a couple other of my books, and it's probably just because those are part of my childhood and my teen years as well. So, but yeah.
Now, who designed this cover? Because it's perfect. It's a perfect cover.
It is, isn't it?
It is.
Simon Schuster has a design department, so you can see this cover designer is different than a different person than the one that designed the others. And that was also a kind of a conscious effort on the part of my publisher to try to draw in new readers who might have just seen my book covers and decided, oh, it's just another one of those books or whatever. Because every book, and I wish, I hope my readers and people listening understand that every single book I write is different. The characters are different, the storylines are different. So they don't just address one thing. This one I love. The back and forth on this cover was the first cover model they sent me was, she was the girl with the long blonde flowing hair, and it was tossed back, and I'm like, oh, that is not her. No. So we went back and forth on the model, and this girl, she definitely represents the character in the book very well, I think.
Yes.
I'm not sure where they found her, but she's perfect, because she's very kind of androgynous and pretty, but not in that kind of, cover model way.
But the way that the way it's laid out with the what I want to say, Monica,
it's kind of got this basket weave thing,
yeah.
or it's sort of like what do you call it? Like a puzzle almost.
Right, and you can see it's coming unwoven at the bottom.
Yes.
So that was part of it too. How to pull it out and make it to really represent the theme of the book, which it does. I think cover designers are like amazing people that can do that.
Yeah.
Well, they did an amazing job with this.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Visionary, but I guess they really did take pictures and cut them into strips and then weave them together. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
But it even has the textural feel of being woven.
Yeah.
It does.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So and part of its color, like the strips going one way are color and the other way they're black and white, and that.
I was really intrigued by that cover.
Brilliant in a way that I will never be, because again that kind of art is just not my talent.
Well, everybody has their own talents. Everybody has talents. Some show, some don't, and
True.
So not everybody can do everything.
Yeah, it is beautiful. Do you feel, so you have a different style of cover. You also have, your other books had, I don't know if all of them did, but certainly the vast majority, a one-word title.
Right. So that was the same thing. So this book was, the working title was Chameleons. You got that in the first poem.
Right.
But that was, there are things, marketing decisions and stuff that are made. They consulted with me on them, so if I would have said no way, they wouldn't have made me do it. But it's a marketing decision to kind of just change up. And you can see the cover size is a little bit bigger than the earlier YAs, although the paperbacks, I think, are this size now. But all that stuff is, again, let's try to figure out a way to bring in new readers. Let's change things up. Let's, maybe draw in somebody that wouldn't be, again, drawn to my other covers because they're so simple or whatever,
Right. And do you think you'll continue more on this line with future books?
Probably. I mean, they've done, like, when Rumble came in paper, they did a really beautiful, very highly stylized cover on that one, and I love that cover. So it's visual interest that's different and, you know, stunning in a different way. So probably, yeah. I'm sure that, you know, that I have readers that, like, had a collection of my books, and they were a little upset with me. I like the single word titles. I like that other size, but, you know, it's like, well, you know.
Yeah, it's interesting because poetry books did tend to be smaller in size. Right. And this one's, and yours and the other books they were shorter. This one is more of a standard size, I would say, for a hardcover novel.
Right.
Yeah. So, Ellen, I would like to talk a little bit about your writing process. By the way, if you've just tuned in, you're listening to Writers' Voices with Monica and Caroline, and our guest today is Ellen Hopkins, author of The You I've Never Known and many other books. And
if you have never read any of her books, this one you got to read this one.
Yeah, and Ellen has been called the best-selling living poet in the world, which that's quite an honor, isn't it?
It is, and you know, I'm sure Billy Collins would not be happy about that. Billy Collins is a big hero of mine, by the way, so love his stuff. But yet to be able to bring poetry into this kind of different landscape, and to encourage young people to read it and to look at it differently, you know, because a lot of times I think poetry is something that young kids love, you know, Shel Silverstein and those kind of funny poems, and they love that stuff. And then kind of middle school, when they start studying it, sometimes they get into the classics, and then it gets where it's a little bit more work, and then it doesn't seem fun. And, you know, poetry doesn't have to be too hard to understand its meaning. You shouldn't have to work too hard to get to the meaning of the poems. But I think that's where we lose a lot of adult readers as well. You know, it's like, oh, it's such work to get to what it means, and it's like, it shouldn't. It should be something that you know exactly where you're at when you're reading it. You know, to in place or in a landscape or whatever. That's what poetry, in my opinion, should be.
I can see that you inspired Mom. As a former English teacher, I know she's got just the right saying for that she's going to tell us at the end of the show, right, Mom?
That's right.
So, Ellen, when you're writing, are all the poems written sequentially?
Yeah, I do. I have to, because especially when I do multiple viewpoints, I would lose track of my place in the storyline if I didn't do them that way. It's hard, and it's hard to revise. So that's the hardest part in the revision process, is if my editor goes, you know, I think we need a poem about that explains that a little more, you know. I'm like, oh, really? How am I supposed to do that?
Oh.
And she's always right when she tells me that. So I've come to appreciate my editor very much. But no, I write in order, and I revise heavily as I go. So, like, I just started the 2018 young adult book, and the beginning, I hate beginnings because you have to get them so right to be able to move on. And I just feel like after like a lot of work, I finally got the beginning right, so I can keep moving through the story now. And the beginning meaning probably the first 75 pages. Very much spend a lot of time making sure the voice is right, the voice of all the different characters, if there's more than one, is right, and different from each other, you know, deciding, you know, all up till now I've written all in first person, even with multiple viewpoints. The book I'm writing now is omniscient, which is the first time I've done that in a while. So it's a whole different feeling, and you have to make sure that the voice doesn't become too narrative then, you know what I mean? There are all these different choices you make going into starting the writing process, and sometimes that shifts during it, but I write sequentially because I need to not get lost.
So sequentially means you're
I have friends that do. They'll write chapters that are way ahead, you know, and then they'll come back and put them together with chapters in between them. But that, for me, I would get so confused because I'm not a huge outliner. I'm not that kind of a writer, so I would lose it.
when you say sequentially, are you shifting back and forth between the viewpoints, between the characters as you go?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
And now I had another question and I lost my train of thought.
I have a question. Do you always know how it's going to end when you get started?
I know about how I want it to end.
Okay.
But that will, through the writing process, that often changes at least a little bit.
Uh-huh.
Because, you end up someplace, you end up on a cliff when you thought you would end up on the beach, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, well, I got to have them jump from the cliff to the beach before I can end it now.
Right.
I have to end it differently, one or the other. So, but I do know about, because if I didn't, then again, I would get lost. You need to know what you're writing toward, I think, to be able to keep moving forward. If you're just writing forward, you're probably going to end up, I don't know, out in the Netherlands somewhere.
So how do you know when you're ready to start writing?
I will tell you, it's been hard for me for the last little bit because A, we have the grandkids again, and B, I'm not going to get into it exactly, but let's just say politics have been, a little bit all-encompassing to a lot of people.
Yeah.
So it's been really hard to dive into this one. And because this book that I'm writing now, it's not as linear. It's circular. It addresses gun violence, and the story, I'm going to let the readers decide which way exactly the story is moving, whether it's going to move left or move right. Either way you go, it's all going to end up at the same kind of end point.
How do you do that? You have places where you can, if you want this to happen, you move forward. Like kids, I've seen kids' books like that. If you want this to happen, then go forward 5 pages, and if you want that to happen, read the next page. It
won't be exactly like that. You'll move through the book, but you're going to decide which way. So there's a gun that's moving somewhere and it's going to end up in the wrong hands. So you, as a reader, get to decide which, and all the characters are interconnected, so you can decide how that interconnection comes into play.
I'm really curious how you're going to pull that off.
I am too. But you know what? At some point, you have to challenge yourself as a writer and challenge your readers as well. So I'm like, let's just do something totally different and off the wall.
Wow.
And it's, the weird thing is it's working. So I'm like, okay. I think it's going to be okay.
Do you know the title of this new book yet?
Right now it's called People Kill People, but I don't know if that will change or not.
Okay.
Wow.
Well, it certainly is a topic that needs addressing.
Yeah, you don't avoid any of the hard stuff, do you?
No, and it's things like this, they just come to matter to me personally. This one specifically, and I'm not anti-gun. My dad was a hunter. He traded guns, so we grew up with guns in the house. But I've also seen there were times when he was in a drunk place where he pulled a gun on my mom, and and he was an expert with guns, but he was just in the wrong space that night. And I saw it happen a couple times, and so I think there are just times when it's the wrong time to pick up a gun.
Yeah.
And now I wouldn't have one in the house because I have little kids in the house again, and I'm just too aware of how accidents happen with kids in the house. So.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up with guns in the house too, but I wouldn't have. I feel like nobody needs an assault rifle.
No.
Absolutely not.
Yeah. So, as you're, we started out the question is how you know when you're ready to start writing. Do you have all the characters kind of lined in your head? Do you spend a lot of time thinking about it? Do you take notes? What is your process in getting ready to write a book? Because you do one a year, right?
I have been, yeah.
Yeah.
Last year you didn't get one just because, again, my life got a little crazy there for a while. But, so I've been doing 1 or 2 a year. There are a few years there I did 1 YA and 1 adult per year. So I also have another adult that's in revision now. It's in production.
Wow.
So that'll be out before the 2018 YA.
So you're doing a lot of writing. Are you writing all the time, or are you sometimes just thinking?
Oh, no. Yeah, there's a lot of that because so my pre-write is all in the character building. Now there will be characters that walk on the page, that I didn't plan on. The main characters are pretty fleshed out when I sit down to write them. So I know, I do character Bibles or whatever you want to call them, character sketches, interview with them, however you want to do that. So I know that, their life circumstances, who their families, are they in school? Did they hate school? Are they working? Who's their love interest? Is that a good or a bad relationship? So all those things go in before I even sit down to write them. Because at least I do, I have to have a pretty good idea of who these people are to get inside their heads, which is what I want. Even in the omniscient, I'm still needing to get inside the characters' heads and get to what they're thinking, because that's how you get to motivation and all those different things. Mm-hmm. So, and I like with the book I'm writing now, I have to know how those characters all connect, and some of them connect very closely and some farther out. So I do a lot of, they call it like storyboarding or whatever, where you're just doing kind of, circles, kind of random thought, without really too much thought, and it just comes out of you, and so you make circles, and you're like, this person, that person, this person, that person.
Yeah, it's like
that's kind of
it's like a spider web.
The informal way of doing it.
Right.
I call that clustering when I do
clustering. Yes.
Yeah. Right, clustering. Yes. Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, and then from there, when you start writing, and are you working? Do you tend to work on just one book at a time? You say since you're doing 2 a year, do you sometimes go back and forth between them?
I usually don't. I usually do one book at a time because I like to stay with the characters. But sometimes just my schedule demands that, or sometimes I'll figure in short story stuff. I've got like short stories that come in, that are in anthologies and like that. And so those will have to interfere with the novel writing sometimes.
Now, do you do short stories in verse too, or are they prose?
Some are and some aren't. So I have one in a book called Grimm that's a retelling of the Snow Queen, and that was perfect for verse. Ah. And then I have one in an anthology called Scary Out There, which was short horror. That's in verse. And then I have one that's coming out in a book called Behind the Song, which is an anthology about it was musicians and writers who picked a song that meant something to us in our childhood, and we either wrote an essay about why that was, or for me, I wrote my story, my take on the meaning of Hotel California by the Eagles. So that was not in verse.
Now, the things that you write about, a lot of them seem to have been based on some personal experience of you or members of your family, but certainly not all of it. Do you have to do much research, and how do you go about that?
Every book demands a lot of research, and its primary research is always the best. And now I've got a pretty broad readership, so a lot of times I can throw out in Perfect. Okay, there's a pageant girl, beauty pageant girl, right? I've never had any beauty pageant experience at all, but I have readers that have, so I threw it out, anybody want to share stories with me? And I got stories from girls, from their sisters, and how much they hated their sister for being that girl, from parents and what that meant to be, how much work goes into the other end of it. And it didn't all end up in the book, but it let me be able to write the character from the right place, knowing what knowing as much as I could about what that experience was like, whether it was good or bad or jealous or whatever.
Do you use social media to gather that information?
Yeah.
Facebook?
So, I've got huge social, I've got, 500,000 readers around Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, a couple pages, whatever, Goodreads. Wow. Lots of social media. It's a big part of my day.
I bet. So I know you spend a lot of time actually communicating directly with your readers, too, answering emails and so forth.
Right.
How do you...
And plus, I do school visits. So I'm in high schools a lot and middle schools, so I'm talking to kids face-to-face. I'm looking at them. So, I've always got kids in the house, it seems like, so I don't really forget what it looks like. But it's good to be in the schools and see what it feels like to be in those situations, in those places, in the hallways, in the gym, in the locker rooms, to remember, because, boy, That was not my best part. That was not my best thing. High school was not, it wasn't horrible, but it was not the best part of my life at all.
Wow. And your readers really come to trust you, don't they?
They do. I'm like the Dear Abby of YA. So, I mean, they share stories with me that they probably don't even tell their psychologists, or I'm sure they don't tell their parents.
Wow.
And I know, I feel for each and every one of those kids, because they're all individuals. Their stories might reflect other stories or seem the same in some ways, but they're personal stories. And so I honor that, and I do listen to them. If they ask for advice or help, I will try to if I can. Always with the disclaimer that, look, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a whatever, but how can I help you find help? Or even sometimes it's just having somebody willing to listen to what they're telling me.
Wow. Well, Ellen, before we run out of time, or Mom, did you have something you wanted to ask?
No, I just wanted to say that's so important, that because sometimes they just don't know where to go to find help. And so you're being there to guide them is very important.
Ellen, before we run out of time, can you read a little bit from the mother's point of view?
Yep.
This is from
this is Maya.
Okay, from the You I've Never Known.
That's exactly right. When she was young. Funerals stink, especially your daddy's funeral. Especially when you have to sneak out to go because your crazy mother would totally flip if she had a clue that was your plan. And hey, why not toss in the fact that your lunatic mom was most of the reason your dad drank himself to death to start with? Mom chased Dad out of the house and all the way to San Antonio 4 years ago. Maybe it's just 80 miles from Austin, Texas, but it might as well have been 800. I've only seen him half a dozen times since he left, and the only way I ever even know he died was because I happened to answer the phone when Uncle Wade called. Mom wouldn't have said a word. I didn't bother to tell her either. Instead, I bummed a ride with Tati, who only griped a little about spending her Saturday, taking me to the funeral of a dude she's never even met. What are best friends for, I asked, when she hesitated to say she'd drive. Sex, she answered, and all I could do was laugh. I've been in love with Tatiana Holdridge since 7th grade, but that's not something I can say out loud, and it's got nothing to do with sex. Tati is the only person who knows me inside out and sticks around anyway. Are you sad, she whispers as we slipped into seat near the front of the mostly empty funeral parlor. The simple question was hard to answer. Dad was in my life daily until I turned 12, but even when he was home, he was mostly absent, kind of like how I am in chemistry class, there but not. Still, he was gentle, funny, and offered himself up when Mom aimed her anger my way. The few times I've seen him since, he always did nice things. Took me clothes shopping or to a movie, something Mom considers frivolous. That's her word for anything fun, frivolous. Things that qualify: movies, arcades, amusement parks, even television. Dad's funeral wasn't frivolous. It was spare. The only people there were his girlfriend Claire, his brother Wade, a few of the guys he worked with, and a couple of kids from the middle school where he was a janitor. That was sweet. They told me he didn't put up with the bullies who harassed them, and they wanted to pay their respects. I'm glad Dad was a hero to someone. To throw pride into my jumble of feelings. Sadness was in there, of course. I also felt pity for Claire, who looked swallowed up by grief. She never said a word to me or anyone else that I could see. But then, if I barely knew my dad, I didn't know her at all. I felt grateful for Uncle Wade, who took care of all the details. His eyes watered as the minister recited his canned eulogy, and that made me remember the last funeral I went to. He was there, too, and Dad, when Grandma and Grandpa McCabe were killed in a car wreck. That must have been 5 years back. Today, after the minister talked, everyone offered a favorite memory. Claire talked about the day she met Dad working at a car wash fundraiser for the school. Uncle Wade told about going fishing when they were kids and how Dad insisted on using stink bait so they wouldn't have to thread worms. One of the kids shared about the bullies. And me? Mostly what I remember about Dad is watching games on TV on weekends. He taught me baseball and football and basketball. Tried to get me to watch hockey too, but that's not my thing. My best ever memory was going to an Astros game, and they creamed the Dodgers. My dad was so happy he sang all the way home. He could really sing.
And that was Ellen Hopkins reading from The You I've Never Known. You know, it's interesting because that part is written in prose, but it doesn't sound that much different than the poetry, really.
No, it doesn't.
There's still, it's still very rhythmic and
It moves.
and accessible.
Yeah, I think poetry is the heart of all good prose. All those things that make poetry, the poetic devices, alliteration, the rhythm, imagery, all those things are what make prose beautiful as well. And so I think my prose definitely reflects my poetry for sure.
Well, we only have a few minutes left, and I want to give you a chance to talk about Ventana Sierra. What does it do, and how can people help?
We're right now in the middle of a big redo on it. The original idea was to offer college and housing to kids aging out of foster care, and what we found is those kids are really hard to get to accept help. So what we're doing now is we're referring them to other resources while we revamp the program, and look for more successful candidates. I mean, I hate to say we weren't successful. So in 3 years we put some 30 kids through the program. A couple ended up dropping out because they got pregnant. But we have one who is now working for an agent, and he's writing his own novels. We have one who is illustrating comic books and graphic novels. We have one who actually was one of the ones that got pregnant, and she came back to the program, and now she's getting her nursing degree. So I guess, it feels, when they felt like failures, I guess they really weren't. Maybe that's how it is when you parent as well. You feel like your kids aren't in what you hope they would. But
You obviously made a difference in some lives. And,
yes, absolutely.
And, if everyone made a difference in one other life of someone who wasn't their family, think how much better the world would be.
Indeed. And there are lots of kids out there that can use help for sure. Even if it's just like mentoring or, helping them, again, giving them the resources they need or showing them where they can go for more help or helping them fill out FAFSA forms or whatever. And we're still doing that for these kids. So.
Oh, great. Well, Ellen, thank you so much for being with us today. We're out of time. The You I've Never Known, it's a fast read. It's just really, gets to you.
Good.
Yeah. Yep. So, Mom, do you have some final words for us today?
Well, I wrote a paper about this when I was in college, and my professor was not impressed, but I thought it was good. A poem should not mean, but be.
That's exactly right.
I know.
Exactly right. So stay tuned now if you're listening on Friday for Planet Erstwhile, and see you next week on Writers' Voices.